Good evening. I have come on this evening to speak to you about the very subtle difference between your mastery and your enlightenment. Now, your mastery is your end of the bargain, and your enlightenment is God's end of the bargain. Now, Sovereign, the way of enlightenment, is all about unpacking the metaphysics involved in engaging with life and the craft of upholding the mental space and the vibrational space and the space in movement to allow for the natural grace of God to move through you in a steadily increasing and unfolding way. That's enlightenment. That's constant illumination. That's having the ability to settle into the shared space that is the body of Christ, that is that field, the unified field of who we all are together in this great big ecology of creation. Now, so Sovereign is about unpacking the metaphysics of mastery, and that's what creates space for grace. That's what creates space for that natural, unfolding, providential agency that moves through you as a natural part of the universe. So where does your life mastery fit in? Where does your sovereignty fit in? Well, that's part of being a co-creator. And in my view, a lot of the modern spiritual teachings focus very much on your end of the bargain, the part of the plan where you show up and bring it. There's a lot of focus on being a conscious co-creator, having the ability to manifest what you want to manifest. You can be, do, and have anything that you like at any time, according to some of these teachings. But the truth is that you cannot master life. You will not master life. And why is that? Because you're participating in this wonderful joint adventure that is this unfolding, natural, expansive universe. Which means that there are things that you cannot predict, you cannot prepare for, you cannot master yourself in relation to something that is unknown. That's why we need grace. Now, so the universe has this natural unfolding quality to it. And there's one of the subtle laws of metaphysics, or laws of the creative cosmos, is known as the law of increase. And that says that where our attention goes, that's what magnifies or enhances in our experience. And then we always have the choice to on how we prehend that experience or how we receive that experience. And it's the dance between the actualized happening and the way that we receive it. That's what life experience is. But when there are 7 billion others also dancing this dance and also making split-second decisions about how they want to relate and how they want to engage in relation to the unknown and to even how you're showing up in the unknown, then what you get is a great big soup of unknown. And so your life mastery is about how you hold your sovereign poise in the soup of all of the moving creation. That's your life mastery. The enlightenment is the result. The enlightenment is the natural inner process that doesn't stop. Enlightenment isn't a thing that you end with. It isn't the medal at the end of the integration of all of the broken shards of yourself. That's not what enlightenment is. It can't be that way, because that would suggest that the universe is linear, that there really is a beginning and an end, that there is a finite way of for the universe to expand and unfold. But there is sort of a finality to a lot of life. And that is very, very natural. There's a beautiful poem that I'm going to read. I hope the writer doesn't mind that I'm going to read it. That speaks a little bit to the finality of some things. And part of our life mastery is indeed how we relate to finality in an infinite movement, with the yearning of knowing that that there is the good news, that there is hope, that life is always ongoing, and yet there's the grief of destruction. There's the grief of seeing things hit rock bottom. You cannot prepare for all things, and you cannot control all things. My husband and I have had a really difficult week, and we have together, we've hit our rock bottom again this week. Those rock bottoms don't seem to go away for good. There always seems to be, no matter how masterful we become, no matter how graceful in our way, life is going to bring the expansiveness of destruction. There's a part of growth, there's a part of goodness that involves destruction and loss. And we've had a really, really, really difficult week. There have been things show up that we just couldn't have expected. There have been twists to the plot that we hadn't foreseen. And there were moments this week when my husband and I looked each other into each other's eyes and thought, how can it be that we're here again? Have you noticed in your life that when you hit rock bottom, it's never completely out of the blue? It's always a little bit like this is something that we've had to meet already. This is something we thought we'd dealt with. This is something that I wanted to have transcended. This is something that I've already declared I'm done with, and why hasn't the universe caught up with my vision of where my life should be at this point? Isn't that funny? It reminds me of Dorothy Kerrin. Dorothy Kerrin is my cousin, and also the cousin of Sylvia, who was the co-founder of Kerrin's School of Thought. And Dorothy Kerrin was a healer in the early part of the 19th century, and she experienced a miraculous recovery. She was born quite sickly, and she had illnesses most of her young life, and she was bedridden for years with tuberculosis. She eventually died from tuberculosis, actually, and she was pulseless for 8 minutes. And her room was full of doctors and priests and people from the community who had come to say goodbye. And after 8 minutes of being pulseless, she rose again. She came back to life and said, I feel much better. I'd like to have a cup of tea. And then she said, did you hear that voice? Did you see that light? And in her story, what had happened was she had died and passed on, and then in the other place, whatever that place may be, she'd seen a vision of Mary and a vision of Jesus at 2 different occasions, and they'd called her to return to earth to continue this sort of healing ministry. There are lovely books written about the phenomenon of Dorothy Kerrin and who she was in our past, so you can look up the stories. They're absolutely gorgeous. But here's the thing. After her miraculous recovery, after her near-death experience and her miraculous recovery, she went on to launch a worldwide healing mission, and she did incredibly well, and she facilitated countless miracle healings. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of accounts and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of witnesses to the remarkable stuff that she did in the name of Christ, in the name of grace, in the name of possibility, allowing and hope. And yet, she remained very weak her whole life. She remained ill of health her whole life. That she had overcome the ultimate physical disability, a body that has died. She overcame that. But yet, life would not let her live it without also engaging with the sacred difficulty. Life would not let go of Dorothy, even though she had found Jesus. She had found Christ. She had found the ultimate hope, the ultimate knowing of truth that forever takes away your fear of separation. But she never fully overcame her weaknesses. She was never so whole that she could master every cell in her body, that she could hold the absolute perfect poise at all times. Accounts say that she could get quite bossy at times and that she was a little bit vain and liked pretty things. Can you imagine that? And she said that one of the reasons her ministry was so successful, her mission was so successful, was because she was weak. Because it reminded her so often to settle in, to surrender. And to remember that for all of your mastery, for all of your shadow work, for all of the traumas that you work on and release, for all of the brokenness in your heart that you put back together, for all of the wounds that you heal, you cannot master life. You need grace for that. Now, I am really blessed in my work that I get to work with people from all faiths, which is cool. You're being a faith leader who works with people with many faiths. That's really, really cool. One of my students recently challenged me to formulate. Formulate means to turn into form. We may understand many mystical concepts. We may have all these remarkable knowings that are esoteric and ineffable and hard to share. But it's the formulation of them that allows true comprehension and embodiment. Do you understand that? So formulation doesn't need to be in word. Formulation can be in dance. Formulation can be in colour or however else you like. But formulation is your way of taking wool and spinning it into tapestry. It's your way of expressing God through you. That's formulation. However you do that, it might even be with your hands. You might be a weaver, I don't know. But one of my way of formulating things is with words. And one of my students challenged me to formulate the mystical mystery of the sacrifice, the death and the resurrection and the ascension of the character from history known as Jesus. She said, can you give us this story in the sovereign way? That means it needs to have universal truth. It needs to honor what we know now of science, of philosophy, of psychology, of the human way of life. It needs to speak universal truth. And she said, can you tell us the Jesus story in the sovereign way? Can you do that? And it was such a delight, because actually unpacking metaphysics, unpacking complex mystical things is such, like I said, a great way of helping it to embody, of helping it to settle in. And so I'm going to give it a punt now on this live. I'm going to give it a punt to explain, using sovereign languaging, what actually went down. What was that thing in human history really about? So here goes. The human consciousness, the way that we are formed, is such that although we know that we are made in the image of full life force, we're made in the image of perfect creative life force, and also inherent in our human consciousness is the ability to judge, the ability to make judgment. Inherent in our way of being in the quantum soup is the ability to see things and decide this is good and this is bad, and this is very, very good and this is very, very bad. Yes? And so what we do is we behold and we place those judgments and we make declarations and we say that it is so. Now, in a quantum fabric where observation and judgment impresses upon the... Here comes a plane. Here comes a plane to affirm. They come overhead every hour or so. Now, we know in the quantum fabric that consciousness impresses upon the fabric itself. We know at the teeniest little level, the biophotons will alter their behavior based on whether or not they're being observed. And we know that the types of observations affect the types of vibrations of that quantum fabric. So we know that in a human experience, given the fact that we have the ability to impress our consciousness on the fabric through our judgment, through the way that we prehend and participate with what our now experience is, then it means that there is an energetic output going on all of the time. Many of the cosmic laws in the universe govern how energy moves. We know of gravity, we know of electromagnetism, and we know of the law of attraction, and we know of many, many, many more. The law of increase, which I mentioned earlier, being one of them. Now, in a system where you have different thought mechanisms, different energy feelings, and all of these are based on cultural dogmas and psychological curiosities, and simply the way that we're built up as a civilization, all of these things imprint on how we prehend the world, and that's why relationship is complex. But the thing is that when two or more come together, there is an energetic effect compounding what we've got. So we know the law of attraction now. So imagine the scale of human consciousness. Imagine the very highest feelings and thoughts at the tippity top, and imagine the very densest, lowest thoughts at the bippity bottom. Now, at around a fifth of the way up, we have a critical mass point. At around a fifth of the way up, this is where energy starts becoming positive. And it attracts more positive energy, and you have a positive upward spiral. That's enlightenment. This experience, this process is enlightenment, more and more illumination. It's not about where you're at. It's about what's happening energetically in your consciousness. That's enlightenment. Underneath the 200 point, you have entropy. There is a downward action. There is more negativity, more negativity, and there's a downward spiral effect. What happened in human consciousness is because of the way that collectively we were arranging ourselves in relation to the world, in relation to God, and in relation to each other, how we were unpacking and understanding what it is to be a person, and how we hold ourselves in enough space to avoid pain and to attract pleasure, the effect was that more and more of us were gathering below that 200 point, and an entropy was occurring. This was absolute disaster for the human consciousness. We were doomed. We were doomed. Do you sometimes feel like we're doomed? There was an intervention in the year 0. Divine mind chose with sovereign choice, divine mind chose with sovereign choice to pierce the veil of time-space and incarnate as a human being with a full remembering of themselves, fully integrated and fully remembering grace, fully knowing themselves as part of the divine fabric. Remember, the angel said to Mary, he shall be called Emmanuel. Do you know what Emmanuel means? Emmanuel means God with us. God with us. God with us. It's a divine marriage. That's what Emmanuel means. And the one who was incarnated onto the earth at that time was an example of that divine marriage. Now, all thoughts don't have equal weight. I'm using thought here because it's easy as a metric to think of thought. All thought doesn't have equal weight. It's a little bit like an upside down funnel. You know how in American politics, voters, there are different voting systems are weighted. So it is in consciousness too. So the purer the thought, the more righteous the thought, the more loving the thought, the knowing, the heftier it is in energetic weight, the more it counts. And so one droplet imagine a drop of food coloring going into a glass of water. It doesn't just stay there by itself. Here's one enlightened little droplet. in the midst of all of this water. No, it disperses. It becomes one. It all becomes the same color. It's the same thing. If you've heard of the Maharishi effect, this is what this is. When one human being realizes something, brings something out of the truth field, brings something out of the divine mind, and formulates it and makes it so, when one person does that, it brings it into the field of consciousness for all people. This is a collective consciousness, remember that. So what happened in year 0 was that one person brought in that knowledge, that realization of complete divine marriage, of absolute grace as part of the fabric of who we are and what we are all about here in life, making it real for everyone. That level of consciousness, that level of knowing, offset the mechanism that had us locked in entropy, thus saving the human consciousness from self-annihilation. And the upward spiral began. But there is process. Process is involved. You know that. You know in your own life. You have an aha moment. You have a revelation. You finally heal that trauma. You finally forgive that person. But you notice in your life that it takes a little while for your manifest body, your manifest experience to kind of creak and groan into realization that I've changed my mind. And so it is in the human experience also. We've changed our mind. We know we've chosen truth. We know we've chosen benevolence. We know we've chosen love. We know that. We know that. We know we're worthy. We know we own grace. We know we can use it whenever we like. But it takes us life mastery to practice holding the space in mind and in vibration and in our movements for that natural illumination and enlightenment to deliver us from the situation that we find ourselves in. Yesterday, my husband and I looked into each other's eyes and knew how is it that we can be here in this situation again, and within seconds, this is what happened. I looked up, I saw 3 pelicans flying above, and I said, "Send help." I asked the pelicans for help yesterday. I said, "Send help, pelicans, send help." And within moments, help came. Within moments. Through the gentle attunement of my own cellular vibration. Through the own subtle remembering. Remembering the truth that is true always. That grace is real. And that there is nothing that I can't master that God also can't master. That was a clumsy way of saying it. Of remembering that grace is real. And I don't need to master life. I don't need to master every outcome. I don't need to control whether this happens or that happens. And I certainly don't need to control my path, my life path. All I need to do is hold myself in sovereign poise, or do my best at least do my best to think lovingly, to feel love, to extend love, to extend grace. If I can be the example of what I want from the world, then I know that I'm holding enough space for grace to do the rest. There's this lovely song that I love to sing. It always reminds me of how I imagine God relates to me a lot of the time. And it's from Narco and Medicine for the People. And in this song, I imagine God telling me, you have your mastery. You've got the keys. You've got the keys to life. You have your mastery. You know what to do. But I am always here. I am always here to lift you up, to enlighten you. And so this is how the song goes. You've got the keys, but I'll never keep my door locked. You can always come right in. And if my arms are full, you can bet your sweet ass I will drop that shit right then. I might be busy, but I've always got the time to surrender to your beauty, beauty. Isn't that lovely? And there's one last piece that I'm going to leave you with tonight. And it's that poem that I mentioned. Someone left in this group. I'm not going to say her name in case she's shy, but I am going to read it to you. And you can scroll down in this group and find it for yourself. But it's just such a sweet reminder, I thought, that you cannot control life. You cannot master life. You do your self-mastery. You do your life mastery. You bring your best to life. Bring your best for God. And let your enlightenment, let your grace do the rest. Here's a lovely piece. You woke up to the morning fog, a wispy, cloudy bit of bog. The trees were laden with nature's tears, the water of life from year to year. The rays of sun usually penetrate through to cast a light so pure and true. Clarity and brightness lift our spirits up with a dewy filtering light, liked so much. Don't be alarmed when the dusk descends. As colours fade and darkness blends, life cycles and it ebbs and flows. The fog returns to simply hold us close. The fog returns to simply hold us close. I love the fog imagery because it reminds me so much of the idea of a rain cloud, a cloud of vapour. All these little droplets of vapour that are held together in one body. Fog. Fog should give us, I think, such a feeling of belonging. It's not scary, it's cozy. And I think that that's such a lovely way to end a reflection on the difference between mastery, my end of the bargain, and enlightenment, which is God's end of the bargain. And what incredible freedom, what incredible liberation to be let off the hook, that I absolutely don't need to master it all. Good night, my loves. Sleep well.